Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to welcome everyone today to the launch of the Cybersecurity Framework. Thank you all for coming. This is really an exciting day for us. Launching the framework is a major milestone achievement and one that we should all be very proud of. My name is Michael Daniel, and I am the Special Assistant to the President and Cybersecurity Coordinator on the newly renamed National Security Council staff. I have the great honor of and pleasure of officially hosting this event today. We have a great lineup of speakers, including White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, the Assistant to the President and Homeland Security Advisor Lisa Monaco, Secretary Johnson, Secretary Pritzker, Deputy Secretary Poneman, a great panel of CEOs, including Marilyn Hewson from Lockheed Martin, Joe Rigby from Pepco, and Randall Stevenson of AT&T. I want to thank all of them for taking the time out of their very busy schedules to help us launch the framework today. We have a wide range of CEOs and company representatives here today, government staff, including Pat Gallagher, the director of NIST, and Suzanne Spalding, acting undersecretary at DHS. Some former government officials here today, including Secretary Chertoff and Deputy Secretary Jane Lute, and some well-known cyber geeks in the audience today. Before I turn it over to our first speaker, though, I did want to quickly highlight that a number of people here in the room today attended many of the workshops and made extensive comments on the framework as it was developed under NIST's leadership. We recognize that you and your companies volunteered time and resources to support this effort, and I thank you for that. My particular thanks go out to people who actually attended all 5 of NIST's workshops. All I can say to that is, wow. I saw the agendas and I saw and I heard the stories coming back from some of my staff from that, so I know that that was not a trivial commitment. That's true stamina or something. I also wanted to recognize the work of some of the key people from the government who made this possible. From the White House National Security Council staff, Samara Moore, Rob Kanaki, Ari Schwartz, and Andy Osment. From DHS, Bob Kolaski, Jeanette Manfra, and Jenny Minna. And then from NIST, Chuck Romine, Donna Dodson, Adam Sedgwick, and Kevin Stein. But most of all, the many private sector, public sector, international, and advocacy community individuals who engaged in this process. You made this possible, so thank you very much. Now at this point, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dennis McDonough, the White House Chief of Staff, to get this thing launched.
Well, Michael, thanks a lot, and let me say thanks to everybody who's come to join us today. Pat, good to see you. The President obviously remains very concerned about exactly what you all are here to talk about today, and namely the threats, not only to critical infrastructure, but also to personal privacy and other critical issues that comes from cyber threats. Indeed, when you stack it up, it's one of the few systemic risks that the country currently still faces. So that's why I'm really glad to be here to kick off the event that actually provides us with some rare good news in progress in this area. While it's obviously only one step, releasing the cybersecurity framework today is a key positive outcome in the President's view. Let me just talk for a minute or so about the threat. It's not going to be news to any of you given what you live through every day. But there have been numerous cyber threats to include against our critical infrastructure. And those obviously are at the forefront of our concerns. The 2012 Saudi Aramco attacks demonstrated the damage that could be caused by a cyber threat. News reports highlight that the data on over 30,000 computers was destroyed, and that's just one example of many from the last several years. The potential for even more destructive attacks on critical infrastructure, as you all know, exists. Attacks that could put public safety at risk or jeopardize U.S. national security and the infrastructure on which that security depends. So as the nation's critical infrastructure is increasingly connected to the internet, it's also increasingly vulnerable to these cyber threats. And we know that our adversaries not only want to, but are getting much more adept at using that infrastructure to attack our capabilities. So while it's extremely difficult for any cyber attack to cause catastrophic damage with national impact right now. The threats are becoming more sophisticated. The infrastructure owners infrastructure's owners vary widely in the strength of their defenses as our adversaries are getting more capable in their offenses, leading to an equation that may ultimately tip the balance against our ability over the course of time to stop the kind of catastrophic attacks that we're worried about. So our aim is to ensure that continued delivery of critical infrastructure, despite any cyber threats, whether natural or man-made, intentional or unintentional, remains solid and one on which we can all rely. These threats are serious and they potentially affect broad swaths of our economy, of course, and they outstrip the capabilities of any one company or, frankly, any one agency of the federal government to address on their own. As a result, the only way to address these threats effectively is through a true partnership between the government and the private sector, particularly with the owners and operators of critical infrastructure, like many of you, along with other stakeholders in the critical infrastructure community. To further that partnership, exactly 1 year ago today, the President at the 2013 State of the Union announced Executive Order 13636 on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. The EO directed the administration to take a series of steps to improve information sharing with the private sector, to raise the level of cybersecurity across the critical infrastructure by developing a cybersecurity framework, and to enhance privacy and civil liberties while undertaking these actions. By taking a whole-of-government approach and in close partnership with industry, we've made significant progress in achieving the EO's goals. Today, we're highlighting our efforts across the second goal, raising the level of cybersecurity in our critical infrastructure. As the President said in his statement, the cybersecurity framework being released today is a great example of how the private sector and the government can and should work together, and if broadly used across our critical infrastructure, it will improve our cybersecurity. But there's obviously a lot more to be done, and that's what you're going to talk about today. So let me just close with a couple of asks of all of you. Because while the administration will continue to take action to do what we can under existing authority, we continue to need Congress to move forward on legislation, statutory authority that protects our nation and as well as our privacy and civil liberties. We must all contribute to the cybersecurity of the nation, from companies and advocacy groups in every sector of the economy, to every level and branch of government, and to our partners abroad. Through the work you've done over the past year, you've taken a significant step forward to advancing that goal, and we thank you for that. But this is obviously not any time to declare our work done, but in fact, time to continue to redouble our efforts as we try to stay ahead, one step ahead of our adversaries. So to continue that effort, let me now welcome the President's Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor, Lisa Monaco, who will provide an overview to the framework. And again, I thank you all very much.
Well, thanks, Dennis, very much. Dennis knows of what he speaks, and I don't just say it because he's the Chief of Staff, but he obviously comes from our world in the National Security Council and comes from seeing these threats evolve. And so I think very fitting that he has launched us today. I want to say a warm welcome to some former colleagues. Great to see you back here. Folks with whom I've served on these issues across administrations and across many years. And I think one of the other arrows in our quiver as we combat this threat is the fact that we bring to it expertise from across a number of years and across a number of administrations, and it's great to see. As Dennis has noted, the President is committed to cybersecurity and improving it across all sectors of the economy. And Dennis himself is the one who drives us to make sure that we are bearing down on the President's commitment. And he, like the President and like myself, and like many of you in your current or former lives, start every day with a briefing about the threats. And that includes, more and more these days, the proliferation of cyber threats. that's more and more a part of the briefings we get. And as representatives and leaders across sectors of our economy, you know the threats that we face from cyber malevolent actors across cyberspace. And you know that the range of threats is growing, and Dennis alluded to this. But I will echo his comment that despite that rather grim landscape, it is good to be here with some good news on the cyber front. And that is the delivery on the President's commitment in the executive order for a framework to help us improve cybersecurity across our critical infrastructure. It's a step forward to address the risk across our national and economic security infrastructure. And the President's very focused on it, and he's very focused on making sure we take concrete steps, and he's very focused on that this year, that we're taking concrete steps to improve across a range of areas, and cybersecurity being at the top. Now I'm going to say a few words about the framework and try and drill down just a little bit more. The main event, of course, we'll be hearing from Secretary Johnson and Secretary Pritzker leading a panel of some of our great partners in this effort who represent elements of the private sector who are dealing with this threat every day. And we'll talk about how the framework can work in practice across the private sector. But you all have been so invaluable, and the organizations you represent have been invaluable in contributing your expertise and your knowledge base and your advice to this effort. Now, because you're expert, you know the very familiar statistic I will now wheel out, which is 85% of critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector. You're saying, of course, I know that. I own it. But of course, the math there says that at least some part of it also is owned and operated and managed by federal, state, and local governments. So that, of course, means it's a shared problem. And we all have, I think, across this process, and with your great help, rolled up our sleeves to address that shared problem. But you all represent critical lifelines of the elements that guide both our national and economic security capabilities. And so, as Dennis said, no single entity can do this alone, no single company can go it alone, and certainly no single agency can do it alone. None of that is new. But what is new today, and through the President's commitment in the executive order, is to find a way to have public and private partners produce very concrete results. And that's what we've got with the framework. And the results are present in the framework, and you'll go through that and discuss in the panel that Penny leads a little bit later. We've shown in rolling out this framework that we're taking concrete results, but also across the last year. In the executive order, it pledged that we and the federal government would share more information with you in what you need to do to protect your networks. And we've done that. Over the course of the last year, since the EO was signed, federal agencies have notified 3,000 companies of cyber incidents, and we've expanded a program that DoD, of course, created to protect companies with whom they work. And we've expanded that across 15 other critical sectors. And today, now we're going to take another step and launch this framework. The framework itself is a result of a year-long collaborative process that the Department of Commerce, under Penny's leadership, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, working with you all, have now created. And that process drew upon standards and guidelines and best practices, drew that all together to come up with this framework to improve critical infrastructure cybersecurity. And it has drawn on thousands of comments from hundreds of organizations. And I think you'll see that, that variety and that insight present in it, and hopefully present in practice. So let me just say a few words about what the framework actually entails. It provides, for lack of a better phrase, a common language to discuss cybersecurity. And it has basically three components. The framework core is really a set of common core cybersecurity activities that we have all agreed, and you all have all agreed through the course of development of the framework, that every organization should carry out in order to manage cyber risk. And these are all drawn from international standards and best practices. That's our collective effort to really raise all boats when it comes to baselines of cybersecurity. It also has a profiles feature. That's the second component. And here, it will help organizations of varying size, stripe, and focus to align what they're doing for cybersecurity with their own particular business needs and requirements. And then the third component is the tiers of implementation. That will allow companies, again, from a wide range of areas of focus and size and scale to identify how well they're doing in developing their risk management practices. And there are 4 tiers, and I think you'll get into that in the panel and the other discussions that you have later this morning. So in short, the framework is designed to be flexible. For those who are just getting started and companies of different sizes, it can be a roadmap to set you off on cybersecurity baseline practices. And for others, for more sophisticated companies and organizations, it can be a way to help you as leaders engage with your suppliers, your vendors, to discuss and figure out how you're going to gauge and chart your course forward from a cybersecurity perspective. Now, I just want to echo Dennis's thanks on behalf of the President. You all have delivered on the President's request to help develop a cybersecurity framework. And I want to thank you for the time and input and insights that you've provided. But as Dennis also alluded, the work's not done. And the key now is to encourage the use of the framework. It's only going to be as good as its application, its adoption, and its implementation. And the key is that voluntary adoption across all elements of critical infrastructure. So I want to thank our colleagues at Commerce and at NIST and all of you for engaging in this process. And as Michael alluded, it was not for the faint-hearted or for the lazy. And so we're very lucky that the group here and all that you represent is neither of those things. But we need your commitment going forward when it comes to implementation and generating folks to adopt the framework going forward, because that's really going to be where we take the measure of our ability to take on this threat. So with that, I'm going to welcome Secretary Jay Johnson to the stage, who's going to talk about DHS's program for voluntary adoption of the framework. And so in closing, let me just thank you all for everything you do to furnish the key drivers of our both national and economic security, and thank you for your commitment to securing our critical infrastructure.
Good afternoon. First, let me acknowledge all the good friends I see here in the audience. One of my predecessors, Secretary Mike Chertoff, the first Secretary of Homeland Security from the state of New Jersey. I am the second Secretary of Homeland Security from the state of New Jersey, as well as being the fourth overall. Former Acting Secretary Rand Beers, a good friend of mine from for a while now. Lisa, of course, Secretary Pritzker from the Department of Commerce, who I've known for a number of years. People here who work for me, people from the private sector, and last but not least, the Deputy Secretary of Energy, Dan Poneman, with whom I had the privilege 3 years ago of being stuck on a submarine underneath the Arctic in the ice. There's not a lot to do when you're stuck for an extra 24 hours on a submarine and you're not part of the crew. And Dan and I learned that it is probably one of the most cyber secure places there is, because there's no email, there's no radio traffic that we get access to. The New York Post I brought on board was long since chewed up. And so we had a wonderful weekend together there. Cybersecurity is one of the most important missions of the Department of Homeland Security. Cybersecurity is a matter of Homeland Security. As I said, that's a cyber attack. As I said in a speech last week, one of the key goals of advancing the nation's cybersecurity is building trust and relationships between the government and the private sector. Part of that effort includes heightening awareness about the cybersecurity threat in plain and simple terms, and I constantly preach this around DHS, that the public can appreciate. You all are cyber geeks. I am an emerging cyber geek, but our challenge is for the cyber geeks among us to be able to properly, in plain terms, convey the extent of our concerns to the broader American public. On April 16th of last year, someone carried out an armed physical attack on an electrical substation in Northern California that provides power to the Silicon Valley and surrounding cities. The perpetrators used high-profile rifles to fire shots at 17 large electrical transformers. With some sort of crude cutting device, they also severed 2 sets of telecommunications lines near the substation in an apparent attempt to prevent 911 calls and systems from alerting operators of the attack on the transformers. What the public needs to understand is that today, the disruption of a critical public service, like an electrical substation, need not occur with guns and knives. A cyber attack could cause similar, and in some cases far greater, damage by taking several facilities offline simultaneously and potentially leaving millions of Americans in the dark. 1 year ago today, as you heard, President Obama signed Executive Order 13636 and issued Presidential Policy Directive 21 on strengthening the security and resilience of critical infrastructure. The executive order called for the government to work with the private sector to develop a set of voluntary guidelines or best practices for improving cybersecurity. Over the last year, drafts of that set of guidelines were presented to our partners in government, the private sector, and the private advocacy community for their input. After this extensive consultation, we are today making available to the full public this set of guidelines, which we call the, quote, cybersecurity framework, end quote. And so that the private sector may fully adopt this framework, we are today also announcing the Critical Infrastructure Cyber Community, or C-Cubed, voluntary program. We are announcing this program today, but it is also actually being stood up today. The C-Cubed program gives companies that provide critical services like cell phones, email, banking, energy, and state and local governments direct access to cybersecurity experts within the Department of Homeland Security who have knowledge about specific threats we face, ways to counter those threats, and how, over the long term, we can design and build systems that are less vulnerable to cyber threats. C-Cubed is also available for immediate advice and assistance in the event of an actual cyber attack. The advantages of the C-Cubed program are that it is provided by DHS at no cost, and it is set up as a single point of access to cybersecurity experts across the Department of Homeland Security for those who need help. For example, say a small bank is replacing its computer systems that contain the account records of its customers. The bank can now work with DHS before they even start the process of buying that new system and figure out how to set it up and ensure that they have considered their cybersecurity risk properly. An example of the type of service being offered by DHS that can be accessed through C-Cubed is something called the Cyber Resilience Review, which is a tool that helps organizations of all sizes evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of their cyber systems and conduct a risk assessment at absolutely no cost. To date, DHS has facilitated more than 300 of these assessments, both in person and in coordination with owners and operators of critical networks, helping everyone from banks to local governments identify and address weaknesses. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, and it boils down to this: In cybersecurity, the more systems we secure, the more secure we all are. We are all connected online, and a vulnerability in one place can cause a problem in many other places. So everyone needs to work on this: government officials and business leaders, security professionals, and utility owners and operators. I thank our many colleagues and friends for getting us to this point, and we look forward to working with you to achieve the important goals before us today. Thank you very much.